In this segment, we're going to be mounting the heatsink on the processor and then installing the processor into the motherboard. This is a very important segment because some of these processors run very hot and they can be destroyed if you don't get the heatsink mounted exactly right. So we're going to start with the economy system, and we're going to use the official Intel box set. It comes with an Intel fan and heatsink on an Intel Celeron processor. Just going to pull this out, put it on the anti-static pad, take the fan out as well. We're done with the box. And now we're going to plug the processor into the adapter card. I'm going to lift the lever. We're going to have to put this in the correct way around. There's only one way that it goes in. What we have here are two corners with pins missing right there, and that's going to have to match up with two corners with the sockets missing on this socket 370. So we're going to line those two up and just drop it in. Now if it requires any kind of force to push it down, it means you have a crooked pin. And out of 370 pins, some of them can be crooked if you're not careful, especially if it was taken out of a different machine. If it's brand new, they should be all straight. So anyway, we got that in there nice and solid. So go ahead and put the latch down, and that'll lock it into place. Now we have to mount the heatsink. This heatsink has to go on perfectly flat. The other thing is that this heatsink is either going to come with thermal tape or we can apply thermal grease to it. Since this already has the thermal tape on it, we don't want to do both because either one is really designed to do a good job at making a perfectly flat contact to the metal plate on top of the processor to the metal plate on the bottom of the heatsink assembly. And it does insulate it a little bit. Basically what it's doing is it's trying to make a level, flat surface between the two, and if you add grease and tape together, it's actually going to be a little bit more insulation, but we have to have some. So it's either one or the other, but not both. Now the way we put this in, turn this sideways so you can see a little bit better. We start with the nearer side, the clip, which is right here, and that's nearer to the edge of the chip, so we'll start by hooking that one, and we'll come over here to the other side, right here to this clip, and we're probably going to have to use a screwdriver. Whoops, the clip came out. Probably have to use a screwdriver. Oh, actually I think I should be able to get it. Sometimes you'll need to use a screwdriver to push down on it. There we go. Didn't need to use it this time, but then again, I have this out separately so it's a lot easier to get to it. If you are doing this on an actual socket 370 motherboard, sometimes it's a lot harder to get to, and you'll need to use a screwdriver to fasten it down. Now before you think you're done here, you need to take another close look. Let's turn it around here and look at the gap between the actual processor chip and the heatsink and make sure it's perfectly even. This is pretty close. We want to kind of adjust it a little bit so we make it as parallel as possible. That means it'll be making as good of a contact as possible to the chip underneath. And you can see that's pretty parallel there. So we've got it done. We're all set to plug this in. And we also need to plug in the processor fan, and that can be located in various places. This one is located right here, and now we're all set. Now this motherboard is ready to be installed into the case. We're going to move this out of the way, and we're going to do the other motherboard as well. This one, as you recall, has this very flat surface, and we need to make sure we have a very, very good contact with the heatsink on it. Now this heatsink does not have any thermal tape on it, so we're going to need to add some thermal grease. Now the rule for this is we want a flat surface, We've got to want a good contact between the two flat surfaces, but we don't want an excessive amount of grease. So we just put a simple single drop on it. And this is a thermal grease you can get at Radio Shack. And just put a little drop on it right there. And that's probably all we need. Because it is such a flat surface, it'll spread out completely flat. But we do need some kind of grease or tape or some kind of material that will even out the slight imperfections in the flat surfaces and make it perfect. Now the other thing we have to contend with is the fact that the level of this chip is so low that it's actually below the level of the plastic socket around it. And if we had a heatsink that is just perfectly straight, it would actually go on at an angle. So this heatsink is actually designed specifically for this kind of processor chip, and so it's got a cutout in part of it to make room for the raised part of the socket. So when we put this on, it should go on there perfectly, and then we're going to double check from the side and make sure that it's perfectly level. This is extremely important. Now we're going to do the same thing as we did before with the other one. This is a little bit hard to see. I'll move it around this way. So we're going to start by putting this clip in. Yeah, not quite. Get this in. I want to be very careful around anything here. Don't want to run that metal piece into any other parts. All right, now that is actually in place. Right in here. That's hooked there. Now we have to hook the other side. So I'll bring it around. Now you have to be very careful with this, as you don't want the screwdriver to slip and hit the motherboard and cause any damage there. This clip is designed with that little hook to actually enable a screwdriver to push it down and get it solidly locked down into the socket. Now before we consider this done, we have to make absolutely sure that this area right here between the processor and the heatsink is perfectly parallel. Now the Athlon CPU does have 4 separate pads surrounding the actual chip, that part with the mirrored surface, to help even out this heatsink, but we'll still have to make sure it's absolutely parallel, and it is, so we're in business. If it is not parallel, then it will be riding on one corner of the chip, and it won't be able to cool it well enough, and it's not going to get rid of enough heat, and the processor can then overheat and possibly be destroyed. We don't want that to happen. Finally, we need to make sure that the fan is plugged in. So if we take a look at the fan connections, we can see there's actually 2 fan connections here. One is labeled fan 1 and the other is labeled fan 2. So we'll plug this into fan 1, and just like that. Since there's actually room for another CPU fan, we could add another one to make it as optimum cooling as possible, but that really shouldn't be necessary unless we have a fully loaded system. So, now we're ready to install this into the case, and that will be covered in the next segment.